Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the AA. This is part 2 of our episode on the Book of Mormon's Smith's local geography. As we saw in episode 1, we have covered the towns that we were going to, several towns that Joseph Smith used, or more than likely used, to build his Book of Mormon geography by using towns in Indian reserves and towns that were just being developed, like Jerusalem, to try to set up the Book of Mormon for possible prophecies. So we have got in and we have heard fair, Saints Unscripted, and a non-biased, non-LDS source explain the Ferguson issue, because this all ties in. Ferguson, who was a member, who started a archaeological society, though he was not a member, I'm not getting into it, this should be part 2, you guys were just quickly recapping. So became disenfranchised after nearly 25 years, I think it was, and left the church because there was zero evidence to be found. So he was looking in Mesoamerica because Joseph Smith later changed his mind from the Heartland, and we're going to be covering that here because it falls in line with the first part and ties everything back together. So, because we've heard Saints Unscripted try to use it's just coincidence, and how did he know about the name of Moroni and Cumorah? So, because those weren't areas, in Smith's local geography, as you saw in the first video. So, go back and watch it if you're missing it. It's a must. You have to see the first to understand the rest of this. We're just quickly recapping if you're taking some time in between. So Captain William Kidd's stories, his treasure stories, he sailed the Pacific, he sailed those areas, he brought back the stories of Moroni and Cumorah, those towns and the islands, and he has treasure stories associated with the Bay of Fundy, which is not that far off when you look at the map of Atlantic Canada and the New England states. So Smith would have been very aware of Captain Kidd, because Captain Kidd was based out of New York when before he started pirate. He was from Scotland, based himself out of New York before he became a pirate or privateer, and settled back in New York and had stories written about him. So Smith was aware of that. So this is why he's familiar with these names. So now we know that it's not going to be in Mesoamerica, and that's not where Smith set up the places, because none of the Book of Mormon places fit in line with Mesoamerica when you start charting them out on the map, and they do in the United States of America. So let's, further ado, get back in and get this going.
Geographic.
Yeah, you maniacs for teaching us about Mesoamerica. You maniacs churches. So how dare you? How dare you? And this is how dare we, because now you're going to see why this is wrong and why Joseph Smith used the local geography we claim he used. Or not claim, we state he used. We don't claim it, we state it.
Geographic descriptions within the Book of Mormon itself are remarkably consistent with each other. But
they are remarkably consistent with each other. Remember that. We got great detail from it.
But none of the New World names they mentioned then have been tied to any specific archaeological sites today. So
again, I'm repeating that. None tied to any. We're repeating things because I want you guys to gain this.
So we don't have a reference point to anchor any specific orientation of Book of Mormon geography.
Oh, yes, we do. And here we get into the Heartland Model, guys. We are going to be looking at this whole area starting and expanding out here into Utah with Young and Taylor. So, and you're going to see names of the Book of Mormon popping up there that you saw earlier in the video, a lot more, and explanations to them, and Joseph Smith telling you. Not just us stating it and showing you the evidence and setting up the show. And when I say setting up the program here, I give you guys the educational, historical account coming in, and then I give you the apologetics and the truth. So I let you guys get the information so you understand. So now you guys know at the beginning of the video what we're talking about, the towns and how they line up with each other. And now let's get more in on it, because there's a lot more to it, and this is it.
What's probably the first place that comes to the minds of anyone who is familiar with the Book of Mormon and how we got it? The Hill Cumorah.
The Hill Cumorah, the start and end of Mormon claims. So literally, the first vision, we're not even going to count the first vision in here. The 1823 account on September 21st by Joseph Smith, or was it 22nd? 21st or 22nd, 1823, Joseph Smith claims Moroni came to visit him and that there was a place in the Hill Cumorah in Manchester County, just down from where he lived. That's important. Why?
The Hill Cumorah sits right here in Palmyra, New York. It's just south of Lake Ontario and just north of the Finger Lakes.
Okay, remember that. It's just south of Canada's border. This is a true believing member. He's not anti. He's not a going after the church. He is a Heartland Model proponent. And he's going to explain why the Heartland Model believes what they believe and why I believe they're correct, even though I believe the Book of Mormon was made up and used the geography that we see all around here. This explains why Joseph Smith used the geography and how we know he used it to create the Book of Mormon with the view of the Hebrews as the bone structure of it.
It's the place where the last ancient American prophet, Moroni, buried the ancient record called the Book of Mormon, named after his father, Mormon, who compiled most of the record. Moroni buried the record in this hill in 421 AD to hide it from his enemies who had killed all of his people in a great war.
Okay, LDS members, and if you're an investigator, ask the missionaries. This is core LDS teaching. This is not anti, this is LDS theology. This is the church's history. So this is the teachings. LDS members, true or false? He's telling the truth, right? True.
About 1400 years later, in 1823 AD, Moroni, who was now an angel of God, came to 17-year-old Joseph Smith, who had been visited by God the Father and his son Jesus Christ.
See, I wasn't lying about that, guys. I'm telling the truth.
3 years before that, at the age of 14. Moroni showed Joseph where he had buried the ancient Book of Mormon record in the Hill Cumorah.
True.
And that is how Joseph Smith got the Book of Mormon record.
True. Very true. That's 100%. There's no disputing that. So if you're a non-member and an investigator, that's 100% truth. Members of the church, true or false? True.
Wrote a letter to his wife Emma. And this letter is in the personal writings of Joseph Smith by Dean C. Jesse. Near the end of the letter, Joseph told Emma that they had been wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once
wandering over the mounds of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as proof of its divine authenticity, and gazing upon a country, the fertility, and we're not going to
beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as proof of its divine authenticity.
See, you can pause it here and read it for yourself.
So Joseph calls this area that they had been crossing from Ohio to Missouri the plains of the Nephites, the mounds of the Nephites, picking up their skulls and their bones.
The rest of this video,
I'm not saying this. It's stuff that I'm not saying. This is in the church's own doctrine. This is in the church's own history. This is church members speaking truth. This is church members, not anti-members. This isn't ex-members. These are current Latter-day Saints who are true believers that sustain the prophet.
will be based on that assumption. Sorry to all of the Heartlanders out there.
Sorry, Saints Unscripted. We're going to actually base our video on this assumption here, and not the Mesoamerica theory, because Mesoamerica is a fail. So we just showed that in the middle of the clip, and this is why we're back here. And see our New Jerusalem, our prophesied New Jerusalem from the Book of Mormon. Was that not the town? Saints Unscripted told us that there was only one town. It's just being erected at the time. That was actually fulfilling Joseph Smith's written prophecy in the Book of Mormon. So yeah, he knew it was there because he wrote into his book that it would be there. So he has it as it's just forming, just like the Book of Mormon says. I know that's not confirming the Book of Mormon. It's confirming that Joseph Smith knew about this stuff because he included it into the book as he was writing it. Because 1825 was Jerusalem. So Book of Mormon came out 1829, 1830. 5 years later.
Were roving right across a major mound building area, picking up their skulls and bones. And when people dig into
this, I'm going back over here, plains and mounds of the Nephites. We heard Joseph Smith say that they came across the lands of the Nephites, and I expressed the accented the mounds intentionally because this is where they bring the mound people up. Because Joseph Smith saw the mounds and he claimed that was the Nephite land.
These mounds, that's often what they find, skulls and bones. Now read these verses in the Book of Mormon. Ether chapter 11 verse 6, Alma chapter 16 verse 11, Alma chapter 28 verse 11, and Mormon chapter 2 verse 15.
And I'm going back over to the big screen on there, so you can pause yourself, read it, keep on going, pause, read, keep on going. So, okay, guys, because you need to read this. This is the church members defending our statements against Joseph Smith, basically. They are giving us our confirmation of what we're stating.
When the people of the Book of Mormon had battles, they buried many of their dead in heaps of earth, or
mouldering in heaps upon the face of the earth.
Mounds, as we call them, and mounds full of bones are all over the United States, especially the eastern half. There's several accounts from an incident during Zion's camp where Joseph and some others dug into one of these mounds by the Illinois River. It was on June 3rd, 1834, so this is just the day before he wrote Emma.
Just before he wrote Emma, guys. Just before he wrote Emma. And remember that I said Joseph Smith on our maps earlier when we started this off with Saints Unscripted. So remember we showed each of the towns, a map of the actual towns, and then the Book of Mormon. And notice how all the towns exactly match up to each other. They exactly match up. So this is an exaggeration, and this is confirming it. So History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Church History, Volume 3, pages 79 and 80, so, and the 48 and later editions, the 48. So, if you're a member of the church, and you're having a faith crisis, and you're questioning the church right now, or you're not questioning, but you want to know more about the Heartland Model, and you're watching this, and now you're probably questioning, go to your LDS library, go to the library. Chances are you're going to have this book here, all the volumes in the church's library. I'll guarantee every church I belong to, I travel all across Canada. I lived all across Canada. I'm a military brat. So I have always seen when I be in the library with my mom and a church library, and she'd be as a kid and she'd be checking out some books. I'd see always in the back against the wall the church history books. As I became a teenager, and I started giving talks, and I wanted certain, passages from church history that leaders would, reference. So from General Conference, because in General Conference, I used to take notes all the time. So I go back and look in my notes. Oh, this was quoted from, here in the church history. I get that volume, I get that little piece, and I would read it and return the book after the meeting. When I was getting ready to leave the church and I was verifying all the claims that were so-called anti, but all the references were from History of the Church and Journal of Discourses. And Journal of Discourses is journal entry accounts from members of the church from the founding and up. So I was able to find it because these volumes here are in the church library. So I suggest you go and you read it and verify for yourself, especially when we make claims coming out of the church, statements that are coming out of church history. We're not making claims, we're actually making real statements, and no different than what you're going to see right here.
You'll find a couple of these accounts in the earliest editions of the History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Volume 2, or a 1948 or later edition, because somebody took it out by error, and then in 1948 it was added back in.
Did you hear that? It got edited out and then back in. So you need one of two editions, and this edition over here is the one that you get in the church library.
So when Joseph and those who were with him dug into this mound, they found a skeleton with an arrowhead lodged in his ribs. Later, the Lord told Joseph that the skeleton was a righteous Lamanite named Zelph, who died during the last great struggle of the Lamanites and Nephites.
You guys hearing this? Zelph. His name was Zelph. And Joseph Smith is the one that's telling us this. History of the Church, Volume 3, 79 and 80. 78, 79, 80. Page.
So, according to the Book of Mormon, this would have been sometime between 322 AD and 385 AD. Anyway, Zelph fought under the command of a great...
According to Elder Kimball's journal, the facts concerning the person whose bones had been found in the mound were not revealed to the prophet Joseph Smith until the camp had departed from the mound. And then you can go on and read the statement from President Kimball.
A prophet named Onondagas, who was known from the Hill Cumorah or Eastern Sea all the way to the Rocky Mountains.
Okay, so guys, this is the church's beliefs. This is the church's teachings. Members of the church who read your Book of Mormon, this is your time to prove if you actually read the Book of Mormon or you just read the Book of Mormon, as in you picked out what hit your attention and just skimmed the words that didn't, because this is all in the Book of Breaking Mormon.
Here's Zelph's mound in Illinois, and then also in that statement the Lord said that Zelph was under the command of a great prophet named Onondagas, who was known from the Hill Cumorah or Eastern Sea all the way to the Rocky Mountains. So this prophet and general Onondagas was known across nearly all the land that is now the United States. The Eastern Sea,
This is coming from the church, not me.
I think, is most likely Lake Ontario, since it's so close to the Hill Cumorah. It could be the Atlantic Ocean, but remember, the people of the Book of Mormon came from Jerusalem, and
he's going to make a good point. I disagree with him. I'll make a comment why, but...
A sea to them is anything as large as the Mediterranean Sea to as small as the Sea of Galilee.
Correct.
And if you look over at the Great Salt Lake on the west side of this map, the Sea of Galilee is much smaller than the Great Salt
Yes, and let's go over here to the map. Here's the Great Salt Lake.
Lake. Now compare the Great Salt Lake to Lake Ontario. Great Salt Lake is teeny.
Correct. But they did understand oceans too. They did cross oceans. Ocean crossing was known to them. They supposedly crossed the ocean, and according to the Heartland Model, they landed somewhere down in this area is what they believe is where they landed, down over here somewhere along the upper coast of Florida. So go check my Heartland Model video on that. We're not getting too much. This here is, these lands are, we were told Joseph Smith didn't know about any of the areas outside his local region. So he did. We're showing you on the maps. He did. He's traveled there. He traveled over this way, and this is when he's traveling back. He's writing to Emma. He's writing to Emma, his wife, on the way back. So church history, Journal of Discourses. So yeah, Saints Unscripted was lying to you. They were deceiving you. This is why we have the maps that we showed you at the beginning, and I believe I inserted it here not too long ago either. So let's get back here and watch more.
So Lake Ontario would definitely have been a sea to the Nephites and Lamanites. Now here's...
I don't disagree with that. I won't disagree with that. But the only difference is where they landed to what the sea is, they have to start manipulating to get from the land southward to get to where they place the rest of the Book of Mormon. Because we have to shift it, because if you see the Mesoamerican model, which is be more correct from how the Book of Mormon says it happens, and that's why they're looking at Mesoamerica, they land on the west side and they form the city of Lehi. They move up northeastward and they find Zarahemla, northeastward to Zarahemla. So, and then as they go from Zarahemla, you go to land Bountiful, the land northward where the narrow neck of land is, which we'll hear about. So, and you have the sea west and the sea east. And if you go back here and before you go, one of the problems is Yes, we have a CE, then we have a CE West, but then we have a CE South. So, and part of the C West goes C North, and then we've got this C here, and then we've got this C, and these two C's aren't mentioned in the Book of Mormon, and neither is this C. So we have three C's. If we take the, yes, that could have been a C, because the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, so they were no bigger than the Salt Lake, smaller than the Great Salt Lake. So yes, we can accept that. That's true. But then we have to account for the Great Lakes that are, these would be a C South, and we don't know about this one. We don't get this C, because this is the C East, this is the C West. Here's a C North, here's another C West. Why are they not accounted for? Because we're going to go straight across, and this is the land of the Gatianid robbers. Utah, Colorado, and that is the land of the Gatianid robbers, and you're going to hear about that. This isn't stuff I'm making up. This is church and why we believe, and we're positive Joseph Smith based a lot of the geography from where he's from, local geography, into the Book of Mormon to build his story.
Nephites and Lamanites. Now here's Doctrines of Salvation by Joseph Fielding Smith, not to be confused with Joseph Smith.
There's Joseph Smith, Joseph Fielding Smith, and Joseph F. Smith, all different people.
We're going to go to Volume 3, and again, pause the video to read the full accounts. Now, Joseph Fielding Smith was called by Jesus Christ to be an apostle in 1910.
Edited by Bruce R. McConkie, so former general authority.
11 years into his apostleship, he was also called to be the church historian and recorder in 1921. And I don't think this is a calling that the Lord of the church take lightly. I mean, remember, the ancient prophets Mormon and Moroni.
Okay, remember, you can pause it. That's why I'm going to the big screen like this. I'm going here, so you can actually pause and read and see what's on these pages, because this is Doctrines of Salvation. This is a church authority book. This is authorized by the church as official words.
They were called by the Lord to be church historians in ancient times, so it's a pretty important job. Anyway, after Joseph had been an apostle for 60 years and church historian for 49 years,
watch where my cursor goes and read those.
He was called by the Lord to be his prophet in 1970. Doctrines of Salvation Volume 3 was published 14 years earlier.
Hillrama, Western New York. They're talking about all this. They're talking about the places, the local geographies we brought up at the beginning of this video, guys. Did you notice this? We are dealing with this now over here. The church is aware of this. The church isn't unaware of this. Do you remember the rebuttal by Jim Bennett in his rebuttal to CES Letters for his short answer? No, they're not. Yes, they are. We have two maps corresponding, and he even has it in his rebuttal that you could see the obvious comparisons. So Saints Unscripted is honest enough to say, well, yeah, coincidental, that they could be. And then they tried to defend it, but then they actually contradicted themselves, showing that the towns were actually beforehand, and they neglected to tell you that Jerusalem was not supposed to be a town during the Book of Mormon time. It was prophesied to come in the latter days, which it did, according to Joseph Smith. He made sure that it got put in there as a prophecy, because Jerusalem was just being formed in 1825. So it was a perfect way to add it into his prophecy. So what better way? And over here, the church is dealing with a lot of this. So this isn't something that we're blowing out our ass and making up, guys. This is serious issues. This is some of the biggest problems the church has to face. Why is local geography in the Book of Mormon, and why does it match up perfectly? And why does the Heartland Model members of the church, proponents, believe in it too?
In 1956. So at this time, he had been an apostle for 46 years, church historian for 35 years, and would become the Lord's prophet in 14 years. In his account, we...
And did you hear that? And he would become one of the church's prophets. Yes. Joseph Smith, Joseph F. Smith, and Joseph Fielding Smith were all prophets, seers, and revelators, and I use quotation marks, presidents of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
See that he puts down the idea that the Book of Mormon only took place in a small part of Central America. He's also open to the idea that it could have taken place in both North and South America, but doesn't claim it. And he
But doesn't claim it. They're being honest. They're being honest, but doesn't claim it. The church makes no official claim where it took place. They believe Mesoamerica, but no official stance.
stands firm that the hill Cumorah in New York is the very hill where the Jaredites and the Nephites were finally exterminated, and where Moroni buried the ancient record and later led Joseph Smith to it.
So yes, and Joseph maintained that. And then they had to try to explain why there's no chariots, why there's no swords, why there is no armor, why was there no mass graves of dead people like claimed in the Book of Mormon, and then they had to come up with the hill Cumorah hypothesis. So that there was two hill Cumorahs, and that the original one where this battle took place was actually somewhere in Mexico, and that's where the whole Mesoamerica started. And when Joseph Smith started hearing about the Mesoamerica findings, oh, that worked much better to his story because there could actually be artifacts to support it now. Never was. You know, he was still wrong twice. 2 accounts he was wrong. But he even moved it. The Heartlanders never accepted it. They made the claim up that church historians and scholars have doctored that comment by Joseph Smith, and it was lies. That Joseph never said it. That's why it's important I covered the Mesoamerica part. Because no evidence found there, and 0 evidence found here in the Heartland model. 0. Not, at least not Book of Mormon claims. And this was the hill Joseph Smith said. Moroni's visitation said Moroni buried the place after the battle. Go back to the 1823 accounts. So, you know, honestly, if you really want to go there, go back and find out why there's no 1826 account. Because Joseph never went in 1826. Because it never happened. And the church can't even use the dates of the holy dates there because they fell in October. Go check my occult practices on Smith. That's all I'm going to say. Anyhow, this is the hill Cumorah that Moroni tells Joseph Smith about. Let's get back on track and why the Heartland model is evident that this is where it took place in the Heartland.
He also goes over the account of Zelph and acknowledges in the footnotes that the omitting of the Zelph account in the History of the Church volumes prior to 1948 was an error. And like I said, you can now find the Zelph account in 1948 and later editions.
Yes, you can. Again, I have read the church histories. When I was leaving the church, I wanted to verify all the information I was coming across, and I was able to take these out. And so can you. You can book these out and find out for yourself.
Now here's something that I find very important. The ancient city of Mantai.
And this is extremely important. Extremely important.
In Missouri. These 2 accounts are from the Kirtland Camp of 1838, which is when the church had to leave Ohio.
Kirkland, Ohio. Kirkland, Ohio. We're at, what, 2312, guys? 2312. So let's go back here. 2312. Let's go all the way back here and give us one of our maps. New Jerusalem. Kirkland is, we're in Ohio right here. Here's Ohio, guys. Ohio. Here's Ohio. Smith is over here. You know, we're coming across. He's familiar with all this region. So this isn't out. You know, look at here. Lehigh County, Pennsylvania. Here's Pennsylvania. Here's New York. Here's Palmyra. Right in this region, here's Harmony. This is where Joseph Smith's you know, where he goes and gets convicted. He goes in 1825 to dig for treasure with Josiah Stowell and his dad. They stay at Isaiah Hale's place, his future father-in-law. He marries Emma down the road, not too far down the road, after the 1826 trial. Then he goes and gets the Book of Mormon plates. Remember this, he still hasn't even written the Book of Mormon, so it hasn't been, I'll use the words translated. And here's Palmyra off Lake Ontario on the Canadian-American border. Let's go back on the screen. Here's Palmyra right here, this dot. And he goes all the way down to where about this G is, right here. So, and he's traveled all those areas. So, he, you know, he's a traveler. This isn't, you know, the church tries to let you think he's not a traveler. So where were we here? Oh, let's go back. History, Volume 3, Joseph Smith the Prophet. So we're almost... Yeah, so let's go back just a little bit more here.
and later editions. Now here's something that I find very important. The ancient city of Mantai in Missouri.
Yeah, let's start here
These
again.
two accounts are from the Kirtland Camp of 1838, which is when the church had to leave Ohio because the violence and the persecution against them had gotten so bad that they left Ohio and joined the rest of the church in Missouri.
So, Smith's familiar with Ohio, a place he's gone to. The church has been around for 8 years now.
These two accounts tell us that the ancient Nephite city of Mantai, spoken of in the Book of Mormon, was right by Huntsville, Missouri, which sits right here. And I think it's very interesting that Joseph Fielding Smith felt the need to include these two accounts in his publication. I think that definitely deserves our consideration. And here's something else about the city of Mantai. So this account,
again, History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Volume 3, page 144, guys, 144. Again, you can go to your church libraries of your members, and you can get this volume, and you can read it for yourself.
is also from 1838 and found in the History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Volume 3. Here we're told that the church was supposed to rebuild the city of Mantai right near Huntsville, Missouri, where it was anciently.
And if you notice, when we were looking at their map, and we're going to see again, it's north of New Jerusalem. So New Jerusalem was prophesied in the Book of Mormon. So by the Jaredites and the Nephites. It came and started in existence, the first house, the first building in 1825. So 5 years, 5 years before the Book of Mormon was out and published. So Smith could have easily added that in there. So we have the town that he puts in the prophecy. North of that is this Mantai that we're talking about.
Of course, it never happened because later in 1838, Missouri made a legal extermination order against the church.
So God got thwarted, according to history. God got thwarted, and LDS history. This is LDS history.
Men, women, and children were brutally murdered by the local mobs.
So we found Ira Ames and some other brethren near the place where the city of Mantai is to be built. So 1.5 miles west of Huntsville, they crossed. So they give you the names of people, guys. We're getting names. It's not like we don't know what happened here. So the church isn't ignorant of all this. They know this.
Joseph Smith and others were imprisoned on false charges, and the surviving members of the church fled across the Mississippi River.
Not false charges. Smith was never falsely charged. Smith pissed off everyone. No matter where he went, he pissed off everyone with his claims. With his attitude and with his arrogance, and he was constantly having to move because he could not stop talking and pissing people off, and that's what it was. And if you go to Richard Bushman, and he'll say the church has been lying about a lot of stuff and whitewashing it. He uses that word, and it's time they stop lying and whitewashing and be honest. It's on stuff like this. Dietrich, or Ulfdor, I can never pronounce his name. So one of the members of the first presidency, I believe he's the second counselor. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's the first or second counselor in the Quorum of the 12, I believe. Or in the first presidency. I think he's made it out of the Quorum of the 12 now. But anyways, he, in a 2013 General Conference talk, and I have it in my CES letters, talks about being dishonest and not always being in harmony with church doctrine. A lot of that is Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and John Taylor's actions. Brigham, Taylor, and Joseph's actions.
To Illinois, and soon after that built the city of Nauvoo on the east side of the Mississippi River.
And Zarahemla, and this is what another part of the Heartland proponent, and you can go watch my Heartland Model show. Zarahemla was to be built across the river from from Nauvoo. So it's supposed to be built. That was the prophecy. Zarahemla would be rebuilt.
But 3 years later, in 1841, there was another city that the church was supposed to build. And this is in Doctrine and Covenants, section 125, verse 3.
Let them build up a city unto my name upon the land opposite of the city of Nauvoo, and let the name of Zarahemla be named upon it. So this is a failed prophecy by Joseph Smith. Section 125.3 is a failed prophecy. There is no Zarahemla. So this was supposed to happen in the time of the saints, and as you just heard, they got ran out. So no Zarahemla, failed prophecy. Didn't even think of that when I was getting this ready. This is just a failed prophecy we just stumbled on. So, but as you're seeing, there's a reason the Heartland model has its reasoning, and Joseph Smith knew the geography well enough. As Saints Unscripted said, you know what, did he have infatuation with, mail letters, brochures for towns popping up? I think he did, because he needed to find places to locate his settings for the Book of Mormon. And as the church got a few years in and they start crossing across, before they brought all the saints with them, Smith would write back to Emma and to Harris and to Oliver and explain them finding Book of Mormon artifacts and bones. We're seeing it right in this video. This is why we have the Heartland model believing in what they believe in.
And here, the Lord himself commands Joseph and the church to build a city right across from Nauvoo on the west side of the Mississippi.
And I'm not saying it. I'm going up here now. He highlighted it. Revelation given through Joseph Smith, the prophet, at Nauvoo, Illinois, March 1841, concerning the saints in the territory of Iowa. History of the Church, 4/311/312. So you are getting told where to find it too. This is why I called it a failed prophecy. It was revelation. When you receive revelation, you're receiving prophecy. And it never came to pass. Joseph Smith failed on that prophecy.
Mississippi in Iowa. And the Lord tells them to name that city Zarahemla.
Listen.
So here's where Nauvoo, Illinois is. And here's where the Lord tells them to build Zarahemla. Now,
hold on. So, do you see that? If I go back, and I'm not going, actually, we're 25 minutes on the dot. Okay, 25 minutes on the dot. Where is my little map? That's why I brought up this guy earlier. See, look at this, guys. Look at this. So we have the Book of Mormon setting here. Is it coincidence? Really, is it coincidence? Joseph Smith had his first vision. His first vision at the age of 14, around 1820, supposedly. 1823, in September 1823, Joseph has his visitation from Moroni. 1823 to 1829, almost 1830, before the Book of Mormon came out. That's 6 years Joseph had a chance to start making the shell on this. And we're going to get into one more part on this near the end called View of the Hebrews, because it's important. It's very important because it ties this all off and wraps it together how Joseph could have done this easily. He had 6 years. Remember, Saints Unscripted shows us 2 of the mail post brochures for towns from 1823, same year, one of them, that's, I believe it was Jacobsburg, so 1823, right here, so where the saints end up going out, right here is Zarahemla, right here's Nauvoo, so that's be Nauvoo right here, Zarahemla right about here, so guys, so in 1823, you saw the brochure saying it's unscripted, got caught in a lie on that one, saying it didn't come into corporation until 1896, but it was founded in 1823. At the same time, Joseph Smith had his Moroni vision. At the same time, 2 years later, New Jerusalem comes into effect. Here's Jerusalem, guys, right here. The first house comes in 1825, so Joseph Smith had access to this information. It took him 6 years from the first Moroni account in 1823 before the Book of Mormon came out. Do you not think he had time to get this all put together? And this isn't even without adding in view of the Hebrews yet, guys. We're not even at views of the Hebrews. Oh, I clicked on 25 right on the bat. All right, we got 12 and a half minutes left of video. Let's wrap through this as quick as we friggin' can, please.
Because it was a new city in a new location since the old Jerusalem was in Israel, and still is. And whenever the old Jerusalem has been destroyed and rebuilt, it's kept that.
Oh, actually, I went to 26, so let's go back here to 25 minutes here.
That was the site.
Okay, so we're 25:03. Sorry, guys.
In section 125, verse 3.
Let's go here.
He also never said that it wasn't. It was the site of Iowa. And the Lord tells them to name that city Zarahemla. So here's where Nauvoo, Illinois is.
See?
And here's where the Lord...
See, I told you there, you know, when we saw that map, there was Nauvoo, there was Zarahemla. So Joseph Smith, this is Jacobsburg, just around here, just over here. So where he had the brochure, here's New Jerusalem, or Jerusalem. You see that, guys? Do you see that? Look where Mantai is. Look where Nauvoo and Zarahemla are. In the areas, Joseph Smith had access to brochures in 1823.
tells them to build Zarahemla.
And 1825.
Now, in that verse, the Lord never said that that was the site of the original Nephite city Zarahemla, but he also never said that it wasn't. Now, if you pay attention to your
Now, if you pay attention to your Book of Mormon,
Book of Mormon geography, Zarahemla was on the west side of a major river called the River Sidon.
look at Major River, guys. Major River. This is why I'm on the big screen and not the small screen.
And the city of Mantai was also somewhere west of the River Sidon and south of Zarahemla. In fact, Mantai was one of the furthest south Nephite cities before reaching the South Wilderness that divided Nephite territory from Lamanite territory. And where is the Zarahemla that the Lord commanded Joseph to build? It's on the west side of a major river, the Mississippi River.
The Mississippi River, or AKA, as the Heartland Model says, the River Sidon.
And where is the ancient site of Mantai? It's also west of the Mississippi and south of Zarahemla.
Yep.
And here's something to think about. Zarahemla was the main city of the Nephites, just as Jerusalem was the main city of the Jews.
But we have a problem here that Zarahemla was founded by the Amalekites, who came over 3 years before the Lehi family excursion from Jerusalem. Amalekites left in 597, 597-ish. So Lehi's family left in 600 BC. So they left at the same time. They arrived roughly around the same time. You're saying small groups of people, only small families. You know, Lehi was one boat. There was supposedly 6 to 8, boats, barges, 6 to 8 for the Amalekites. But still, even with that, are you saying in a few years they went from, maybe a few dozen to a few hundred, into hundreds of thousands of people into Zarahemla? And go back to my Book of Mormon video I just put out on my rebuttal. My last Book of Mormon rebuttal, because I go over this and how it's impossible. I'm not going to repeat it here. You guys can go watch the other video. So let's go back here and get it here.
Now, when the Lord revealed that a new Jerusalem would one day be in the Jaredites and Nephites' land, which would become the United States, he specified that it was a new Jerusalem because it was a new city in a new location, since the old Jerusalem was in Israel and still is.
Yes, and it still is. So that's why it's New Jerusalem. So kind of like New Salem for Salem over in England, New England, the state for England when they came over here. So New York, York for, instead of York for the Americans to name it after York, England.
And whenever the old Jerusalem has been destroyed and rebuilt, it's kept that same name, Jerusalem.
And they will try to claim that during the Islamic reign and the Crusades, that was prophecy, but it's not. And the return of the Jews after the diaspora, after World War II, but it's not. Jerusalem was always Jerusalem, even in control of the Muslims.
Because it's the same city in the same location. Now, when the Lord commanded Joseph and the church to build Zarahemla, the Lord didn't call it a new Zarahemla. The Lord called it Zarahemla. And so that's just something to think about.
Yeah, because New Jerusalem would be in a different land, in a different place than Jerusalem. Zarahemla would be rebuilt in the same spot Zarahemla had been. So they don't call the temple in Judaism New Temple, they call it Herod's Temple. So because it was built in Herod's era, but on the same temple as Solomon's temple, the original temple. And when the third temple comes, it's not going to be called the New Temple. It will be built on the same site. That's what they're getting at right here, guys. This is the point, if you're not getting the point.
I personally believe that that is the site of the ancient Zarahemla.
Yes, he
Now,
does.
just like Mantai, Zarahemla was never built because, once again, the persecution against the church got so bad that Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were murdered by the mobs in 1844.
Yes, we're not getting into this today. This will be another video. We'll get into the Masonic aspect of it. We'll get into the poor widow's cry that Joseph cried out and was ignored. We will get into the gun that was, snuck into Taylor and the Smith brothers in the Carthage jail. And I have the church authority, it's online. It's, someone nailed the church curators at the Carthage jail, and they had to admit to the story. They were very well aware of the historical aspect and admit to it, so we'll play that. But they weren't martyred. Joseph Smith was... There was a burning of a printing press that was rival to Smith and defaming him, according to Smith. He did not like the fact that they were defaming him. So, aka, they're calling him out, and they were exposing him for what he was, and he burnt down their printing press. He took his ass off, and his brother. There was a deal made. If he came back, they would not arrest him. So he would just have to pay fines. He would not be arrested. They lied to him. I won't lie. They lied to him. They arrested him. They put him, Hiram, and John Taylor in jail. Someone snuck a gun into them. They tried to escape. It failed as they were trying to shoot their way out. Some of them got shot. They went back into the room, fought their way back in. They fought off the mob, now pissed off with them, knowing they had a gun. And they fought to get into the room. And that, it's been whitewashed by the church what happened. Joseph Smith jumped out the window after being shot to try to escape. That was his only way to try to get out. Cried the poor widow's cry, and was by his fellow Masons, because he betrayed the Masonic oaths he took after being raised a Mason. They turned his back on him and let him die. That's the truth of Joseph Smith's death. And we'll get way, way, way more into detail in another video. This wasn't the video, but you needed a little bit of a backstory on the martyr.
And the church had to leave Nauvoo under the leadership of the Lord's next prophet, Brigham Young,
who was a hell of a lot worse than Brother Joseph was. Seer Smith was a saint compared to Brigham Young and his tyranny and his history of murder and criminal activity. Yeah, it is what it is. I'm not going to call it anything else. The evidence and the proof is there. We'll get that in Mormon history when we reach this period of the church. The church took off to the Indian Territory. Utah was not part of the U.S. territory at the time. Neither was Texas, California, New Mexico. They took off pre-U.S. Mexican War. They took off the pre-U.S. Spanish-Mexican War. So that was Indian Territory. When the U.S. beat the Mexicans and got the land from them, took that land, Utah was part of the land that they won in the war and became part of the U.S. territory. And once again, the Mormon Church, was within U.S. territory. But when they fled to Utah, it was much bigger. It was part of Colorado, part of New Mexico, and all of Utah. It was huge. So, and it shrunk after the U.S.-Mexican War, and the U.S. won and started making them into territories. That's the true history. Go check it out. See for yourself. I'm not lying. You can check it out. That's just historical fact. One of the reasons Mormons ran down to Mexico, because they had some roots there pre-territory days.
And settle in the Rocky Mountains, mostly in what would later become the state of Utah. But before we move on to statements from Brigham Young, I've got one.
Church history again, guys. Church history. Let's go back and see what the church just says itself.
More from Joseph. This is also in the History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Volume 3, and is also from 1838. So after Joseph left Kirtland, Ohio, and was living with church members in Missouri, he and a few others were in a place which the Lord had named Adam-ondi-Ahman.
Ade-ondi-Ahman. The last, that, I'm not getting into that in this video, guys. Sorry. Yeah. Just so you know, this is just more concrete evidence of Joseph Smith placing everything here, creating his story.
Which is in Missouri. In that area, Joseph found a hill with the remains of an old Nephite altar or tower which once stood on the hill.
Whoa, what's this? He lives at the foot of a tower hill, a name I gave the place in consequence of the remains of an old Nephite altar. The remains of an old Nephite altar or tower that stood there, where we camped for the Sabbath. Out of the words of Joseph Smith himself.
Hill, and he named that hill Tower Hill. So looking at our map, here's where Adam-ondi-Ahman is, and that's the location of Tower Hill, which Joseph spoke.
And that is a church teaching. LDS members, true or false? Be honest, true or false? Is this not a true LDS teaching? I was taught it. Anyone my generation and older, you were taught that. So that will be New Jerusalem. At the end days, when the Lord comes back, in your belief, that's where it's going to happen. That's where the saints are going to be gathered in the last days. True or false?
Spoke of, where he found the remains of an ancient Nephite altar or tower. Okay, now we're going to go west over to the Rocky Mountains.
And this is all important because the saints are following the Book of Mormon trail. Do you notice this? The saints, the Hill Cumorah, where the whole story originates, and a lot of the original Nephite towns take place originally. So the core foundation, and as the saints move, you're moving through Book of Mormon lands, and they're showing it through the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith's own testimony. This isn't anti-member saying this. This isn't, ex-member saying this. This is the church itself and Joseph Smith himself. And we're going to get into the church more with B.Y.'s comments.
Like I said before, after the mobs had murdered Joseph and his brother Hiram in 1844, they violently drove the church out of Nauvoo, Illinois in 1846. The Lord's next prophet, Brigham Young, led the church across the Great Plains and into the Rocky Mountains.
Yes, and this is a proud Mormon history point, the pioneers. One of my ancestors is a pioneer. So, yep, I'm related to a handcart company. The Martin Handcart Company, that's my ancestors. Wilford Woodruff converted one of my ancestors. He sold his stuff and his property and left his daughter behind, which is where my family line comes through, with one of his cousins. He went out with the saints across the migration that we're hearing about right here, the trek across west to the Great Salt Lake. So Council Bluff and all that, it's well recorded, the trails. People, the pioneers who came across later used the Mormon trails. So, and we have another mosquito. I got him. Yeah, he didn't get away. Last time I tried, that was what I was doing. I was trying to get a mosquito. I missed him. I couldn't get him. Got him this time. So yeah, so my ancestors were actually there. He was supposed to actually come back or send out for my ancestor. So Marguerite, he never did. So, and he never came back for her, and it was a muddy history in my family because we were trying to figure out who the hell her father was, because she was raised by her uncle and ended up taking on their last name instead of keeping the Martin name. So we finally figured it all out, which was ha ha ha, because my family's Roman Catholic. And my grandfather we're always Catholic, we always will be Catholic, and when my family converted, it was a horrible thing in his eyes back in 1985, 86. Just to find out, hey, you know what? One of his ancestors was actually converted by Wilford Woodruff and is the Martin Handcart Company. So I know the history of this very well because it's something I'm very proud of, as well as the church is very proud of on the trek west. So let's hear more of this. I don't think we need to cut over.
Mainly in what would become the state of Utah. Anyway, over the years, they'd settled many cities in the West. And here's an account from Temples of the Most High by N.B. Lundwall. And this is where
Temples of the Most High.
Brigham Young was at the Tabernacle in St. George, and he was speaking to the church in that area about the spirit world.
The spirit world, guys. This is one of the revelations from Brigham Young, one of his sermons in Revelations.
In his talk, he mentioned that the spirits of the Gadianton robbers were outside the tabernacle and that they had lived in these mountains, and St. George is in the Rocky Mountains.
And guys, if you can find old church videos, pre-90s, there are some old church videos. I remember the missionary showing it to my mom and us watching it shortly after joining the church back in 85, 86. That's how old I was to remember back then. I was, 8 years old. Date myself, I'm 44 now. But anyways, I remember watching one of the videos about the building of the Salt Lake City Temple and the St. George Temple and the dedication outside of the St. George Temple. And I remember this event, him mentioning it in this event, because I thought it was so damn cool.
So the Gadianton robbers had lived in the Rocky Mountains. And something else along those lines, this is in...
Okay, and this is the Journal of the Discourses. Journal of Discourses. So, members of the church, how important is this book in your theology? Very, very important. Journal of Discourses, Volume 3, 12, by Brigham Young, page 128.
Journal of Discourses, Volume 12. There's another account where Brigham Young told the church, while he was at the Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, he told them that the spirits of the ancient Gadiantons were all around them, and that their battlefields were scattered all over this American continent.
I remember these in the video. That's why I said if you could find the old videos pre-90s of this, it's in there, and it was awesome if you're a kid. It was really cool, because who didn't like the Gadianton robbers, honestly? They were awesome.
So once again, spirits of Gadianton robbers in the Rocky Mountains, and their battlefields were all across this American continent. And what continent are they on? North America. So let's go back to our map. Here's St. George in southern Utah, and here's Salt Lake City in northern Utah. As you can see, both of these cities are...
Yeah, see on the Great Salt Lake, guys. Here's St. George, and here's Salt Lake City.
...are in the Rocky Mountains. And according to Brigham Young, the Rocky Mountains are the mountains spoken of in the Book of Mormon where the Gadianton robbers lived. Here's some scriptures in the Book of Mormon to look at in Helaman chapter 11, 3 Nephi chapter 1.
And just so you guys know, and hopefully I can remember by the end of this video, we're getting close to the end, just under 8 minutes of my video, which means about 25 more minutes, hopefully less. But I will try to put lds.org/scriptures there, so you can go and reference all these scriptures yourself, because they are in the on the website for the church themselves.
And 3 Nephi chapter 2. So the Gadianton robbers had become so great in numbers that both the Nephites and the Lamanites had to join forces just to drive them out of their lands. And these verses talk about how the Gadianton robbers...
This used to be my... Helaman was my favorite book. Helaman and Alma were my two favorite books in the Book of Mormon. I won't lie. Those were the bomb books. Not bomb for Book of Mormon. I didn't even think of that. That was my two favorite books, Helaman and the Sons of Helaman, or the Army of Helaman. In my bedroom, I used to have a big poster for the Army of Helaman. So, and that was always my favorite story on the Gadianton robbers. I used to love when I got this era of the Kingsmen and all that. So this is... Yeah, you can find all this... So, and this here is 3 Nephi.
Lived in the mountains, and the Lamanites and Nephites would gather together and drive them out of their lands, chase them back up into the mountains, and then the Nephites and Lamanites would return back to their own lands. And also speaking of St. George, as well...
So you guys can see this. Also, history of the St. George Temple. Kirk M. Curtis, pages 24-25, guys.
George, as well as Mantai, Utah, which is not to be confused with Mantai, Missouri. These accounts that I'm going to show you come from The History of the St. George Temple by Kirk M. Curtis and Mormonism and Masonry by E. Cecil McGavin. So Brigham Young informs us that the Nephites dedicated the site where the St. George Temple now sits. The Nephites had intended to build a temple there, but for some reason they never could. So Brigham and the church...
And he moves these pages around. That's not me, that's him doing it. I paused like this to try to read stuff because he was driving me crazy moving stuff around.
Built the St. George Temple in that spot that the Nephites had dedicated so many centuries earlier. So that tells us that at one point righteous Nephites lived out in that area as well. And also Brigham Young tells us that Moroni dedicated the temple site where the Mantai temple now sits in Mantai, Utah. I'm not sure if that was before or after the extinction of the Nephites.
Something I never knew as a member. I don't know how I missed that, or if it was just something not taught or changed by that time. That was something new to me, and I didn't even know that to watch it. I learned something new here on this video myself. I won't lie, this was new to me, guys.
But we do know that Moroni dedicated that temple site where the Mantai temple now sits.
Some critics propose that Joseph Smith modeled the book.
Okay, so we've got to, we've gone through 3 things and we're coming on to the last right here. We've shown that Joseph Smith could have easily and more than likely did model the geography of the Book of Mormon based in local geography. The Book of Mormon, after we've been told that it does give us great accounts in detail, and we do, we can place every single place within the Heartland model, can't we? Can't we? Minus artifacts, it makes all sense on how you go. There's a reason they have it constructed. Their evidence is just weak evidence with the Earth Mound building Native Americans, and you can see that in my Heartland model. I do debunk their side as well. They are completely off of, their evidence does not support it. It just supports that Joseph Smith used local areas to base off the Book of Mormon, so he had references for the places. Now we're going to find out where he got the core of his idea from. The core. Because this isn't anything new to the time period. This belief of the Native Americans being ancient Hebrews, and that is nothing new. So take it away, Saints Unscripted.
Book of Mormon after ideas and themes he stole from Ethan Smith's View of the Hebrews.
Who? Ethan Smith? Who's Ethan Smith? Tell us.
Let's take a closer look.
But let's look at some of the facts about the book's distribution, about its author, and see where it leads.
And see where it leads. Sean from Heart of the Matter, former member, very knowledgeable. Again, I'm not a fan of his. I think he likes to talk way too much and just instead of getting to the heart of what could be said. So, but he is a minister now, so that's part of his thing is to, minister. But his information is solid and reliable, and let's hear what they both have to say.
In the future, we'll examine parallel to parallel between the Book of Mormon and the View of the Hebrews.
Okay, so in 1823, this guy named Ethan Smith...
1823 again. 1823. Why is that an important year? 1823 is the Moroni visitation. 1823 is when one of the towns that just happens to be exactly where a Book of Mormon town is by a similar name, almost identical, just minus how it's spelled, happens to be in 1823, Ethan Smith. And let's hear about Ethan Smith comes out with a book called View of the what?
The Book of Mormon and the View of the Hebrews.
Okay, so in 1823, this guy named Ethan Smith, not related to Joseph Smith,
correct,
published View of the Hebrews. In it, Ethan...
But I'm going to stop here really quick. No relation to Joseph Smith and his family as a Smith. There is a huge, huge connection. And we're going to see why this is so damn important.
Argues that ancient Israelites traveled from the Middle East to the Americas, and Native Americans are descendants of these Israelite immigrants. This idea was not exclusive or original to Ethan Smith. A lot of people actually believed this back in the day.
Yes, a lot of people actually believed this back in the day. This wasn't an uncommon hypothesis, and that's why Ethan Smith wrote the book. A pastor, a minister, Ethan Smith. So let's hear more about this book.
But the concept sounds familiar to us because a similar idea is expressed in the Book of Mormon.
The first edition of this book, View of the Hebrews.
Before we get into that, Saints Unscripted said this may sound familiar to the guys because it's the same principle as the Book of Mormon. 1823 is the view of the Hebrews. 6 years later, 6.5 years later, is the Book of Mormon, which came first. It's not which came first, the chicken or the egg. The chicken is the view of the Hebrews, and Joseph Smith laid the egg out of it. And what does Sean have to tell us? And you can go to Dan Bogle, you can go to Church Fair. Fair does not deny some of this. They whitewash it, but they don't deny it. So whitewashing is still acceptance.
Was published in Pulteney, Vermont in 1823, the same year Joseph Smith claimed that he had been told of a buried, treasured book.
Yes, the same year and in Vermont. Joseph Smith is from the Vermont area. He's from Vermont, his family. He's born in Vermont and they moved to New York. If you don't know that, members, shame on you guys. Literally, shame on you. The church owns the family home in Vermont. They own the property in Vermont. So you can go. I've gone to the property. I've been there. They've got it set up as a tour area. It's a tourist area. When I got on temple trips to the Toronto Temple, we went to the Sacred Grove and we went to Joseph Smith's family home in Vermont, Sharon, Vermont. Sharon, Vermont. Remember that, Vermont. This is where Ethan's from. Let's go back and hear what Sean said. Let's go back here.
Of these Israelite immigrants. This idea was not exclusive or original to Ethan Smith. A lot of people actually believed this back in the day, but the concept sounds familiar to us because a similar idea is expressed in the Book of Mormon.
Woo-hoo! The first edition of this book, View of the Hebrews, was published in Pulteney, Vermont in 1823.
Pulteney, Vermont, 1823. Vermont, Joseph Smith's territory, where he's from.
The same year Joseph Smith claimed that he had been told of a buried, treasured book.
Okay, and why is this important? You're going to find out in a moment.
The author was a man named Ethan Smith. No relation to Joseph.
Correct, no relation.
Ethan was a New England congregational pastor who had graduated from Dartmouth College.
A New England pastor that was a graduate.
Besides authoring View of the Hebrews, he published a number of other scholarly works on Christianity. But View of the Hebrews was a book of conjecture, a fanciful book, and an attempt to explain the origins of the American Indians.
Did you hear that? And that's a proven fact. Down there in the description link below, and Saints Unscripted is going to ask you to do the same thing. He's going to tell you down in my description, I took it from him, is a online version of View of the Hebrews. So you can actually go and read it yourself, guys. You can. I have.
This was the purpose.
Well, I didn't use that link. There's other sources for it on there. I can give you 2 different links just so you can see it's the same book. But yeah, it's the same copy. I've read it.
The book View of the Hebrews. Pastor Ethan Smith lived in the same Vermont town as another man named Oliver Cowdery.
Oliver Cowdery. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Who's Oliver Cowdery? Who is Oliver Cowdery? A Book of Mormon witness and former scribe of Joseph Smith on the Book of Mormon. And let's hear more about Cowdery because they try to make a claim that is bullshit.
We will see him later as he becomes the scribe of the Book of Mormon down the road.
No, Sean likes to jump around and talk a lot, like I said, so I cut out a lot of Sean's, talk and just put the facts together. I just put it so we don't have to go 3 minutes on something that takes 30 seconds.
What most Mormons don't realize is that Joseph and Oliver were related.
They were related.
In 2 separate lines. Another reason they could have encountered each other well before 1829.
Remember, I told you. You can go check it. The church owns the property and it's a tourist attraction for the church. It's a tourist area like the Hill Cumorah. So owned by the church, Sharon, Vermont, the Smith family home. That's where Joseph is from. They moved to New York. So Vermont is where Smith is from, guys. Verifiable fact. I've been to the home. I've been to the churches. I visited. It's a tourist center. So you stop there and it's a tour center.
And another reason news of Pastor Ethan's book, View of the Hebrews, could have come to Joseph Smith while living in New York.
Now, to spice up this conspiracy theory, critics are...
Conspiracy theory? How's it a conspiracy theory? Honestly, conspiracy theory, they were related. We know that. Actually, several people that were witnesses at the Book of Mormon were actually related to Smith.
Eager to point out that Ethan Smith was a pastor in the same church that Oliver Cowdery's family attended.
Yes, it was. And let's hear how he tries to deceive you. Listen. Listen, even close your eyes if you have to so you don't get distracted by pretty pictures.
So, Oliver must have acquired view of the Hebrews, given it to Joseph Smith, and voila, the Book of Mormon. The only problem is that the latest record we have connecting the Cowdery family with this church is from 1818. Ethan Smith wasn't pastor until 1821, but even if Oliver did know...
So what's the problem there? What's the problem? So they were together in the same town. So we get accounts of that they were there in 1818. So yeah, we get accounts. That's before 1823. That's before 1821. That's before 1820 when Smith had his first vision. Where's the problem? I don't see the problem. It's just confirming the fact that Oliver was a congregational member. He's telling it, but he's trying to confuse you and give you 2 dates and say it's contradictory. Let's go back here. Let's go back. All right. What's the problem?
Oliver must have acquired view of the Hebrews, given it to Joseph Smith, and voila, the Book of Mormon. The only problem is that the latest record we have connecting the Cowdery family with this church is from 1818.
Yeah, the earliest, not the latest, the earliest record is from 1818. That's great. That's what we want. That's what we want. Where's the problem?
Ethan Smith wasn't pastor until 1821.
Yeah. So about 3 years later, Smith got his first vision in 1823 when 2 years after Ethan Smith released the book. Where's the problem? This is the problem. This is our problem. Our problem is we all believe off the facts and the evidence that Smith took his local geography, placed names, changed the names around to make it sound more, because they could be very much placed off biblical names. They were religious people. Of course they would. So he took those names he liked. He modified them. He was interested in Captain Kidd. He knew about the stories. David or Daniel, I can't remember what his name is. Saints Unscripted, mentions about the Pacific. I show you Captain Kidd. We know that Smith was, aware of them. There was no doubt about that. And we know that we know that Smith could have been easily aware of view of the Hebrews. That his cousin, Oliver Cowdery, or second cousin, I believe he was actually, his second cousin, Oliver Cowdery, from Vermont. Joseph Smith is from Vermont, born in Sharon, Vermont, so later moved to upstate New York. So that's that. There's no contradiction. There's no error there. He could have easily had contact with Oliver and got the book. Even without that, there's other ways, as we're going to see. Where's the problem? This is all things we are pointing at to show that Joseph Smith actually wrote the Book of Mormon, not received revelation and received it.
But even if Oliver did know Ethan, the historical record is clear that Oliver didn't meet Joseph Smith until 1829.
That we know of, but they were family. How do we know that they were family? Especially if they're, Vermont and New York aren't that too far away. Vermont, Sharon and where he's from in Vermont aren't that far whatsoever. They were second cousins. I know all my second cousins. I grew up with my second cousins.
After Joseph's translation of the Book of Mormon had already begun.
Well, yeah, not necessarily the first 116 pages, and then, and we'll get into that. We'll get into that with the Book of Mormon, not this video.
Not only was Ethan Smith from the same town as Cowdery, he actually pastored the Congregational Church that Oliver Cowdery's family attended from 1821 to 1826.
So, earliest accounts, according to Saints Unscripted, and that's true, is from 1818. That's true. They started when he became minister, attending his church from 1821 to 1826. 1823, Ethan Smith wrote View of the Hebrews, so there's been 3 years. So in 1826, we know Joseph Smith was treasure digging down in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and telling stories of his Moroni vision from 1823. So you see why I did, do you follow? Are you following? Are you piecing? Are you piecing this together? Do you understand why we laughed? It wasn't because of weak testimonies. It wasn't because we were offended. It wasn't because we wanted to sin. It's because we found this information out that was factual and just points to the church being wrong. You can disagree with me. You can remain a member. I'm not trying to tell you have to stop believing. I just want you knowing the truth, so you have a right to make up your mind.
View of the Hebrews was written by Ethan Smith during these years. It's important to note that Joseph made it very clear in his revisionist history about the church that he and Oliver never met or knew of each other until 1829.
Remember I said that we know of when Saints Unscripted said 1829? Smith tells us they never met. He's adamant about it. He wants you to know they have never met each other. Why? Could it be because they collaborated together prior? They were family. They come from the same place in Vermont, pretty much just down the road. So his second cousin had access to View of the Hebrews. His minister was the creator of the book. Are you piecing this all together? Just as the View of the Hebrews comes out, Joseph Smith has the Moroni vision. 6 years later, he has a book that even Saints Unscripted says sounds very familiar, because that's what the Book of Mormon is about too. Okay, we'll close this off.
This is so important to Joseph, but I would suspect that he emphasized this to ensure nobody would see the collusion between Oliver Cowdery, Ethan Smith growing up in the same place, and Oliver and Joseph coming together, and the Book of Mormon then coming out.
And before I ever heard of Sean, met Sean, you can ask some of my ex-member friends and my friends who are LDS, because I have talked to some of them about this. So this was source of contention for me 20 years ago, before I ever ran across Heart of the Matter. So before I heard of Sean, and myself, Dan Bogle, and many, many, many others, once we got to this information, came to this conclusion ourselves. It wasn't too friggin' hard to come to this conclusion on our own. So let's finish off the last 3 minutes of this video clip as quick as we can.
Now, to spice up this conspiracy theory, there are lots of other parallels, but I don't want you to get the impression that these books are just a bunch of parallels.
And we have to cover the parallels because they are important.
There is a ton of stuff that Ethan Smith emphasizes in View of the Hebrews that just doesn't show up at all in the Book of Mormon.
Yes and no, and we're going to see in a second.
In View of the Hebrews, continuing revelation is non-existent. Native Americans imitate the Ark of the Covenant and practice circumcision. The Book of
Well, yeah, because they were Jews. They came from Israel, and Lehi's family should have been doing that too as Jews, because circumcision was done away with Jesus, and that's explained that they already knew the new covenant. Bull crap. Bull crap. It was Smith adding Christianity to it and not sticking to Judaism, and Ethan Smith stuck to Judaism.
Mormon doesn't teach any of these things, and in the case of continuing revelation, it teaches the complete opposite throughout its text.
Well, yeah, Smith didn't want to plagiarize it. He was creating his own book. View of the Hebrews was his shell. So that was his, he didn't want to plagiarize it. It would be very obvious. What defense is Saints Unscripted making? All they're doing is defending it.
Even late LDS apostle B.H. Roberts asked
B.H. Roberts, an apostle,
the other apostles, please help me understand how to explain these parallels between View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon.
This is a huge issue for us. A huge, huge, huge issue. Bye-bye, kitty. A huge issue. Because not only the parallels inside of Views of the Hebrews too close, so is the geography, the local geography. It's just too much of a coincidence. And that Smith and Journal of Discourses in church history, that Brigham Young all said that it took part where all this area just happens to line up in the heartland, is the Book of Mormon area, the land of Zelf. They found the Nephite, remains. They found a Nephite tower. This is why the Heartland Model is adamant that the church was hijacked on its history, and I don't disagree with them that they are wrong on where it takes place. Where I disagree with them on is Smith knew he was wrong, and Mesoamerica seemed to interest him a lot more and fit his imagination. So yes, he said, yeah, I think that's where it actually did happen. And so the church, listening to Smith, changed their mind, and with Ferguson, boom.
Additionally, many of the supposed
See how it all
parallels between the
comes
two
back
books
around?
share a third common denominator, the Bible.
Yes, it does. The Bible. And we're not going to focus on that because they both come from Jerusalem, supposedly. The Old Testament time, one from the Tower of Babel, one just a few years later. Of course, it's going to have parallels. Isaiah is the main comparison to a lot of it. So the first little bit Joseph Smith took the whole Isaiah freaking concept off of View of the Hebrews and then went on his own.
We're going to show you some quick comparisons between these two books. Let's run the scroll, and I'll tell you what they are. Okay? So, View of the Hebrews. The origin of the American Indians came from Jews who traveled over from the Old World. The View of the Hebrews teaches that.
Okay, so LDS members and investigators ask the missionaries about these teachings in the Book of Mormon. LDS members, if you're watching this, you who are watching this, please pay attention to this and compare this to what you know about the Book of Mormon, please.
The View of the Hebrews teaches the use of extensive quotations from the prophecies of Isaiah, of a future gathering of Israel and a restoration of the lost 10 tribes.
And is that not what we were hearing at the end of our Before the Saints Start Moving about Adam Ondam Omni? So that is the future gathering of Israel and the restoration of the 10 tribes and the second coming of Jesus when he'll put his feet on both sides of the continents. This is an LDS teaching. It is.
People of the New World from the Old World going through a long journey northward, which included through seas and lands of many waters.
Correct. And this is one of the differences, quickly, this is one of the differences between the Book of Mormon and the View of the Hebrews. Book of Mormon has them coming through the Arabian Sea into the Indian Ocean and around through the Atlantic. So in View of the Hebrews, they have them going up through what we would know as the true migration, even before we knew about the first wave and the Clovis migrations through the Bering. But that's how View of the Hebrews has them going up through Russia, Mongolia, Siberia, and crossing in through where Alaska would be and coming down and through. That's how View of the Hebrews does. So that's where they're talking about there.
There was a religious motive for the migration in View of the Hebrews. The division of the immigrants into a civilized and uncivilized group occurs in View of the Hebrews. There were long wars that erupted between these civilized and uncivilized groups. The eventual destruction of the civilized people by the uncivilized occurred in the View of the Hebrews.
The Lamanites defeating the Nephites and killing them off.
An assumption that all native peoples were descendant from Israelites and that their language came from the Hebrew was in View of the Hebrews.
And for those investigating the church or non-members watching this, the Book of Mormon was written in a Reformed Hebrew. Reformed. So after their fathers, not even regular Hebrew, a Reformed. So it was a language that comes from their ancestors too. So that's important to know if you're not a member.
View of the Hebrews taught that there was a buried book consisting of yellow leaves which was lost.
Does that not sound like the Book of Mormon in the Hill of Cumorah?
Ample descriptions of extensive military observatories or watchtowers overlooking them as
Did we not just see that in the Heartland Model where Brigham Young talks about the towers and Joseph Smith and the Gadianton robbers?
in View of the Hebrews. A change from a monarchy to a republican form of government is in the View of Hebrews, and the preaching of the gospel in the ancient Americas is in the View of Hebrews.
Would that happen to be 3rd Nephi in the Book of Mormon, where Jesus comes after his resurrection for a few days?
Okay, view of the Hebrews. So these are just a few, just to show you that
Just a few, literally, just a few, literally, just a few.
this is not an original book. View of the Hebrews was published and written in 1823, Book of Mormon 1829. 6 years difference, same themes, they're in the book.
And we heard Saints Unscripted say if it sounded familiar to you, it's because it's the same concept as what the Book of Mormon says. He admits it. Do you see where we're coming from now, guys? This isn't anti. We're not trying here to destroy your testimony. We're trying to give you transparency when the church refuses to give it to you.
There are several other parallels from View of the Hebrews we could discuss, but here's what I suggest.
Listen.
If you read or watch something online that's got you concerned about View of the Hebrews, just read View of the Hebrews. Just
read it. Just read it, guys. That's what he's telling you. Just read it. Why? Why am I fading over here? Why? Because, yes, there's some dissimilarities to it, but he's banking on you listening to him and trusting him, and that you won't actually go read it. I've read it. I have. So, it's too much. You guys need to go read it, and you'll see. So, as you saw, I presented the LDS apologetic side. I presented the critical side against the church. I hope you guys realize we are not here to break your testimony. We are not here to lead you astray. We just want you guys having the truth. And that's important. You can remain a member of the church. You can leave. It doesn't affect my everyday life whatsoever. But being a former member of the church, experiencing the heartache of discovering this and verifying this and knowing the church hid this from us was heartbreaking to me. Heartbreaking. And it's something that we should have been told. We were never taught or ever even told that there was a alternative to what we were taught growing up. We were never told about the Heartland model and the Great Lakes model. We were never told there was criticism that Joseph Smith may have, and I'm saying may because the church could have used that. So word. They could have said that he may have used local geography, and try to tie that in somehow and saying, well, yeah, the Book of Mormon is similar because that's where the Book of Mormon took place. But they didn't. So they didn't want you knowing that because they know Joseph Smith took from the View of the Hebrews because he had access to it. He was related to Oliver Cowdery, who came from the same congregation of the author of the View of the Hebrews. Joseph Smith's family, and Joseph Smith is from Vermont, Sharon, Vermont, a verifiable fact. So they would have known each other. They would have had access to each other. Joseph Smith tells us firmly that they had never met each other before 1829. It's his word we get that they never met. Yet we have everything pointing to Joseph Smith constructing the Book of Mormon over a 6-year period before he had it dictated. The local geography shows it. So the Heartland model shows it. Joseph Smith and Brigham Young's own comments show it. And the apologetic side pretty much confirms it. So guys, you take what you want, you do what you want with it. It's not going to change how I feel about you. It's not going to change my opinion. We're here to be transparent. We're here to let you make up your own mind. Until then, may Fetus Apostate say and see you guys later. Keep it real. Peace out.